I'm doing well. What about you?
I'm doing well too. It's so nice to see you.
It's nice to see you too. Oh my goodness.
I think I basically have been trying to touch base with former students to see, what they wish they could have learned more about, either with me or with anyone else in your educational experience. And it could either be something that you feel that was not touched upon at all, or something that you feel like you would have liked to dive into more deeply. So I'm going to let you take it over.
All right. I feel like the importance of being wrong is just an idea that I feel like a lot of students should be told or informed about as they're going throughout their education.
Yes. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, like you hear it a couple times when you're in like kindergarten or throughout elementary school, but once you sort of leave that setting, it's like you have to be wrong. You have to be right when you raise your hands. Like you have to know the answer if you're raising your hands. You have to know every answer on the test. You have to know a lot of the times, especially in like your STEM classes, you're told, oh, you should know this material before walking into class, you know?
Right.
And it's weird, like they'll tell you in elementary school, you're supposed to be okay with being wrong, right? You're supposed to be okay with being a little vulnerable in situations. And then sometimes you'll meet teachers in like the higher grade levels and they'll almost they're criticizing of the fact that you don't know certain pieces of information.
So how do you handle that?
Sometimes I won't handle it very well and I'll be like, ugh, well now I gotta study harder, now I gotta spend all this time by myself, not asking for any help, focusing on this. And that's never a healthy mindset to have.
Right.
So I feel like now I'm working more on like taking advantage of other resources, like bouncing back with my friends, trying to figure out, okay, so how do I get this piece of information? Or maybe even like working on different habits or finding more resources to support myself throughout the class. Like if it's a class I know I'm going to struggle with, like English, for example, I'm not very brilliant at sitting down and reading books for hours and hours and hours.
Okay.
So figuring out strategies to supplement that, like I'll listen to audiobooks while reading the book, right? So I can help myself focus.
That's a great strategy.
Yeah. And like there's also going to be teachers who, even if they're not teaching you that subject, they're going to support you in finding ways to help yourself study,
Yes. It almost seems contradictory because we definitely do believe that you do have to practice being wrong, because it's just as, if not more important in the learning process. However, the system is not set up to really allow you to be wrong without penalizing you, in the sense of whether that comes out in grades or whether that comes out in self-esteem or confidence within the classroom, because obviously if you're wrong, then you're less likely to want to participate again, things like that. But how do you think that we can allow students to have more opportunities to be wrong and get comfortable being wrong without it impacting them negatively?
Like you're saying, for tests, there's not a lot of lenience there, right? That's also why I feel like class structures where tests are like 80 to 90% of your grade is not really reflective of what a student can do.
Right.
And when it comes to like participation and like grade balance, having an environment where students feel supported while they're learning, I feel like could be very important.
Mm-hmm.
And I know growing up, like a lot of my teachers have done that, but I also know a lot of teachers haven't really prioritized that as much. They prioritize a lot more, well, I have to teach you this based on my curriculum, and it doesn't matter if you go home loving learning, loving the class, or loving the experience. I just need you to know this information. And I feel like that's really diminutive of what learning should be.
Absolutely. So trying to get or create an environment that fosters love of learning, that way even if you are wrong, you're not going to feel it as much.
Yeah, whether it's classes that even when you're like failing, you're like, well, at least I enjoyed the topic, or classes where I'm like, okay, so I'm getting good grades. Maybe I'm not understanding 100% of the content, but I'm enjoying the class enough that I'm taking the step back to relearn the material even after I finish the test, right? So many
Absolutely.
kids will learn it, take the test, and then immediately erase it to learn on to the next thing.
Why is being wrong so important?
I think it's because it's inevitable. It's inevitable and it's part of the learning experience and it's part of being a person, right?
Yep.
It's part of every single aspect of being a person. I mean, like, it's a very vulnerable position sometimes to be wrong.
Yeah.
So they wouldn't want to talk about certain aspects of themselves, their lives, because they're scared of being wrong. And that
Mm,
really limits the amount of conversation and communication that you can have.
absolutely.
So when you prioritize being right over everything else, you're not going to be able to grow as a person or as a learner.
Even the word wrong has a connotation and it has
Yes.
an implication within and of itself, as opposed to it just being another step in the process of learning. But we as humans, I think we automatically jump to like, well, I just must not be smart enough or good enough or ready for this, you know. And I think that's also interesting. What about the role of parents? Because I think a lot of where we get our concept of right and wrong, or what is right and wrong, or being afraid to be wrong, comes actually from home first before it comes into the schools. So, how does that play a role for you, do you think?
Like before this meeting, I was like finding articles and like research,
Okay.
and pretty much all of the articles were directed to parents,
Mm.
which I thought was interesting. Like I didn't see a lot directed to kids or like individuals trying to teach themselves to be okay with being wrong.
So, what were these articles saying?
It's mostly like, talking about what we're talking about, the importance of being wrong, how it really helps learning, um, but mostly how to encourage acceptance of being wrong
Mm.
inside the household. And it was a lot of like, okay, so when you're wrong, don't get mad at yourself. Don't beat yourself up. When your kids get wrong, say something wrong, like don't verbally say anything that's like condescending or harming them. Just see how you could change it into a learning experience, the whole growth mindset, right?
Yes. And if we stop saying they're wrong, do you think that we're risking then motivating kids? Because sometimes kids are motivated by the fear of being wrong, right? Maybe they study harder, maybe they push themselves a little harder, maybe they try with a little bit more kind of focus because they're like, okay, I do not want to get anything wrong, because if I get something wrong, then my parents will be upset, or my friends will think something of me, or I won't stay in this class that I want to stay in. Do you think that it can also be a motivator, or do you think that's not really a healthy motivator?
I think that's a really interesting question. And just to focus it, right, I'm just going to look at like math, for example. I will tutor like kids based on the program that like reaches all around the world. So they're doing completely different curriculums.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them are using like the bar model method. Some of them are
Right.
using what's basically algebra.
Right.
And if one way doesn't work, I'll try the other way. And then they get it immediately.
Yeah.
So for math specifically, maybe it isn't telling them that they're wrong. Maybe it's finding a more efficient way for them to learn. Maybe it's, I don't know, maybe it's just saying, okay, it's not the right way, but
Mm.
it's not necessarily wrong. But I do think that the fear of being wrong has something good to it. I don't know.
What do you think happens when, like, what do you think inside of us happens when someone says you're wrong, that has a negative reaction in us? Why do you think that is?
In a learning setting, I feel like when somebody tells me that I'm wrong, I lost a little bit of credibility.
Mm,
Like if I'm working in a group setting and I say something and it's wrong, they're not going to
mm,
listen to my opinion for the next thing that I want to say. You know what I mean?
mm.
Because I sort of get that. Like if I'm working in a group setting and somebody is repetitively saying like the wrong facts, I'm not really going to trust them if they say something that I don't really know about.
Yeah. And then on a larger scale, thinking about, our society at large, do you feel like there is a level of like lack of forgiveness or leeway? Because I feel like at least social media and the media make it seem like if you make one mistake, like you're done or canceled, as they say, right?
Hmm.
So do you feel like that is acceptable? Do you think that's okay because certain positions require certain responsibility? Or do you think that everybody gets the same amount of leeway and forgiveness with being wrong? Or do you think there's some things you just don't get to be wrong about?
I feel like social media, the issue with social media is it sort of takes like a snapshot of every person.
Yeah.
So people will feel way too comfortable putting out very niche topics about things they don't really know about
Mm,
onto social media, put that on blast, and say, "Hello, world, take it or leave it." Like, that's
right.
not, people aren't going to take it or leave it because, especially when it comes to certain topics, those are very difficult things with a lot of implications. And
Yes.
especially when you have high level platforms, it's not that you don't have leeway to be wrong, it's just you want to be more careful when millions of people are watching you.
And you also have time to think about it.
Exactly. It's not
Yeah.
like somebody's demanding you to post at this moment.
Correct.
You could just take a step away, be like, maybe I should Google this.
Yeah.
Maybe I should make sure that my facts are straight.
Do you think that it's okay to tell someone they're wrong, or do you feel like that should be kind of eliminated from the vocabulary altogether?
I feel like you have to be more comfortable receiving it and you should be able to tell people that they're wrong, you know? Because a lot of people are wrong and I'm
Yes.
wrong a lot. So it's sort
Me
of just
too.
something that happens and you have to be like, okay, time to move on from that one. Try to build back from that one.
So if you had to create lessons for, let's say, fifth graders, sixth graders, because I think that this is it's a practice that you have to kind of start very young. And how would you create a lesson, maybe 1 to 3 lessons for students to practice not only being wrong, but being told they're wrong and being okay and more comfortable with that and not taking it as I'm dumb or stupid or not good enough or like an insult?
One day you would talk about the importance of being wrong and why being right all the time just won't work. Even if it was possible, it wouldn't really be productive.
No, right?
So maybe I know there was this one really good YouTube video I watched. It was about a positive bias within like grant-based studies
Okay.
where universities and private companies will only give money for like studies and researches that they think will be successful. So this is specifically for medicine.
Okay.
They won't fund experimental things. They won't fund anything that could have extremely useful implications, like especially in genetic research, because the fear of being wrong does lose like millions of dollars. Like
Dollars, right.
that's a situation where being wrong has a lot of stress, but it's held back. You look at it historically, it's held back a lot of potential advancements.
Mm,
A lot of things that we now know, if we investigated in the past, could have put medicinal technology so far in the future.
right.
Maybe you talk about the balance of being right and wrong.
Agree. And I think the challenge also comes with, because it's adults that are teaching these classes and we're human and we have not been trained to be comfortable being wrong. So it's kind of a cycle, right? It goes, so we have to be more comfortable ourselves as the adults in the room or educators in the room being wrong and recognizing how to communicate that to others too.
Like I'll get uncomfortable sometimes if somebody were to tell me I'm wrong, but I'll never not appreciate that they told me
Mm,
I was wrong.
mm. I think the other challenge with this topic, which is so, so important, is, well, who's right is right and who's wrong is
Mm.
wrong. You know what I mean? Other than a math problem or science, maybe. Even science clearly can be controversial. So it depends on, right? What do you think is right versus what I think is right? So how do we work around that?
You know that like that cheesy picture of like it was like a clip art. It was one guy standing in front of a number and it was a 6. There's another guy on the opposite side and it was a 9. And it's
Okay.
supposed to be like a synonym, an allegory to like, oh, different
Ah,
perspectives could both be
yes.
right.
Yes.
And it was just that whole class period we just talked about how there's certain situations, like certain arguments, certain fights, and we just talked about like we made up situations, hypothetical situations, and we just talked about okay, so who's in the right? And you sort of agree. I mean, obviously they both think that they're right,
Yep.
and it's hard to say that either of them are.
Right.
I just thought that was very helpful as a kid.
Yeah. I guess accepting that there can be multiple truths and being okay trying to understand and accept someone else's truth. Have you heard of Allegory of the Cave?
No.
Okay, I think that's something you should look up. I think that you would really appreciate it. As far as the articles that you mentioned, and I know you said it was geared towards parents, did it give any advice to parents?
I mean, a lot of it was really just teaching by example.
Okay.
So it was a lot of like when you do something wrong, don't beat yourself up about it. A lot of it was like when you see somebody else doing something wrong, don't lecture them about it. Like especially if you have kids of different ages in the house, right? A lot of the
Yeah.
times you'll see parents being very forgiving towards like the smaller kids, but the minute an older kid does something, they'll like chew them out. And
Mm,
it's sort of like finding that balance between you can't like not discipline your kids, but finding a way to make it like a growth moment or like a parenting moment and be like,
It's hard.
I know. I don't know if I'd be able to do that if I was a parent. But like, I don't know, maybe trying to find a balance, or maybe after you chew them out being like, okay, sorry. Like, I don't know.
Sorry I yelled at you, but let's take this moment and grow together now. I get what you're saying, though. No, I totally understand. In an ideal world, we would be able to pause and make it a teachable moment. We totally understand. Was there anything else that you wanted to add?
I just feel like it could help in pretty much every situation of life.
I 100% agree. There's so many layers to this that I think are all helpful for kids, at least for the fifth graders and fifth and sixth graders. I think even just them knowing like failing and being wrong is really just the best teacher. It just is. I really do think that. So I agree with what you're saying. And you've given me something to think about.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Indiana. Good luck with the rest of your school year.
Thank you. It was really nice talking to you.
You too. I'm always here if you ever need anything, okay?
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.